Hello and welcome to Writer to Writer. Today we're talking with Sandra Kitt, author of numerous texts from Harlequin romances into women's fiction today. And we're looking forward to hearing her thoughts about her writing and her movement from romance into a new genre and what her plans are. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you
for joining us today. We had said we were going to start talking about your background. As I said before, I'm fascinated by the shift in careers that you've made. You started off as working in freelance from graphics, designs, and so forth.
That's right. Well, I've had many incarnations, reincarnations. I keep reinventing myself. It's all that energy. But my background is in fine arts. My undergraduate and master's degree is in fine arts and illustration, printmaking. And what I set out to do originally was to be a children's book author and illustrator, and haven't done that yet. I've written a number of children's books, but at the moment they're unpublished. And in between doing that, I also became a librarian, which was, fortuitous, a matter of being in the right place at the right time. And I manage a research library in astronomy and astrophysics in New York City at one of the city museums. So I have all of these different careers, and just to add to the mix, I became a writer about 15 years ago.
Writing seems to envelop all of them together and give you a chance to explore all those possibilities.
Well, it's just another creative outlet for me, actually. I think I have a lot of creative energy coming out of the fact that I did study art beginning from the time I was 8 years old. That combined with being a very voracious reader, it all connects in one way or another. The art, the library, being very visually oriented, liking words, the writing, it all seems to be a path, one thing leading into another. So although I did not consciously start out to be a writer, it seems almost inevitable that I would become one.
Only way that we'll work them all together. As I mentioned before, you started off writing with Harlequin.
Yes.
Was that a hard door to open?
Actually, at the time it was not, although I did not know that it was easy for me at the time. Everything happened very, very easily. And as I said, I did not start out to be a writer. I simply got an idea for a novel. I sat down and began writing it, didn't tell anyone what I was doing, because I had no idea that it was going to be a book when I finished. And I actually didn't begin approaching a publisher to see if anything was saleable until I had 3 completed manuscripts. When I did, Harlequin was the only outlet, really, for a woman writer doing stories about families and relationships and love. So I went to them and met with an editor and eventually submitted my manuscripts. And actually, my first book sold in a week. And I did that without benefit of an agent. So a lot of things clicked for me right away, and I was like totally innocent and naive about it. I just sort of walked in and there it was. But I was also fortunate in that I came into the market at the height of it, when romances, as they were called, are called, was just exploding. There was a huge, huge readership, and a lot of the publishing houses were developing romance lines and scrambling to find enough stories and authors capable of writing them. And so I sort of came in to the middle of all that energy, and that combined with having stories that they felt were really good sort of set me on the way. And I went on to do about 9 or 10 books for Harlequin before deciding that I wanted to do things that were much bigger, much more complicated, and weren't strictly just romance.
You said you started without an agent,
Yeah.
and I've heard horror stories. Don't do anything without an agent. So you have one now, as my assumption. And when
Yes.
did you decide to get one? And
Well, after I sold my first books on my own to Harlequin, I realized that there was really no need to have an agent at that point. I was writing what was considered category romances. Categories are also science fiction stories or westerns or adventure, those kinds of things that fall into particular areas. And when I was able to negotiate my first few contracts, I realized that there were boilerplate contracts, and you only had but so much space to negotiate and change things. And I was very happy with the conditions of the contract and very happy with the money, so I just proceeded on my own. Where an agent became important for me was when I decided that I wanted to go beyond doing those categories with very simple parameters to doing things that were much bigger. because there was an issue of money, there was an issue of conditions and benefits in the contracts that I felt an agent would be better able to do for me. And also, quite honestly, I just got tired of splitting myself between being the businesswoman and paying attention to that aspect of my career, and then stepping into a nearby phone booth and coming out as an author. So I decided, okay, I know what this is all about. I know how to negotiate a contract, but now I really want someone else to do it for me. So I now have an agent. It's actually my third agent, and she's excellent. And I'm now doing mainstream fiction, much bigger books.
Great. So is shopping for an agent like shopping for a car, or?
Well, actually it is. I think that one of the things that writers, especially beginner writers, forget is that when you have an agent, they're working for you. So you have to go out and look for an agent. You have to interview them, like any employer interviewing an employee. The agent is someone who's going to be an intermediary for you, run interference between you and the publisher. They handle all the tough questions. They negotiate the contracts. They fight for you and get the best conditions. They're your advocates. They're on your side. So you have to feel comfortable with that relationship. It's a lot like marriage. It has to be someone that you trust, because there's the issue of money. There's the issue of their guidance and leading you and navigating your career in a direction that you really want to go. So there are a lot of things to take into consideration. And the agent doesn't make any money till you do. So it's incumbent upon you to find someone who is assertive, a little aggressive on your behalf, because the more they negotiate for you, the better.
I'm sorry, I just had this flash of this. I watch way too much television, but the Frasier and his agent is this annoying smoke-consuming woman, but she will just get the best possible deal in the world, and his moral ethics.
It's kind of a stereotype, but basically it's kind of true. The agent is this sort of tough as nails, little bulldog kind of person who's tenacious and is not going to give up, and I want this for my writer, and I want that for my writer, and that's exactly what you want. Most creative people, whether it's a writer or an artist or an actor or an actress, are not good about the business end of their career. That's not what they're concentrating on. So if you can find a good agent to do all that stuff for you, so much the better.
Indeed, indeed. So you moved from Harlequin because there was a limitation you felt in what they were allowing you to do.
It wasn't a matter of what they, I suppose so. Romances concentrate exclusively on the relationship between the couple, the man and the woman, and therefore they are the prominent element of the story. They are in every chapter. The idea is to keep them together. They have a conflict they're trying to work out, and obviously towards the end it's the happy ending. But my feeling is that these people are connected to other things in their lives, families, jobs, history, traumas, all kinds of things. And so I wanted to do more with the stories. I wanted to put in more issues and more characters. And the romances don't allow that. So I wanted to do things that were much, much bigger. And even when I wrote for Harlequin, my editors used to tell me, you don't really write romance. Your books are really mainstream. So I sort of knew I was on the road.
And a romance, like your two central characters are your round characters, and everyone else is very flat.
Yes,
just
exactly.
Background scenery for your central two.
A little bit, yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about the first book then that you did, Beyond Harlequin, if you would, please.
Well, that book was called The Color of Love, which was a kind of groundbreaking book for the industry as well as for the publisher and for myself. It's an interracial story. It's contemporary. And the hero in the book is a white police officer, and the heroine is an African-American book designer. And there were a number of things I wanted to explore in that particular kind of situation. Number one, was it possible for two people from essentially different backgrounds to really come together and form a relationship that was genuine, that was growing, with problems that had to be worked out, but was real? The other thing I wanted to do is I deliberately made the hero a police officer to challenge myself as a writer, because I know that historically the relationship between law enforcement and communities, ethnic and minority communities, is not good. There's a lot of suspicion, there's a lot of prejudice there. So to really sort of throw in the kitchen sink in the story, I wanted to see if I could write a story where the readers would believe that a white hero who was also a cop could fall in love with a heroine who was black, and vice versa. That is a very, very popular book. I get most of my mail from readers is about The Color of Love, and it really resonated with people. Very good reviews. It's doing very well.
Great. Well, that's the one I did read. Show it off for you there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As a graphic artist, this is very aside, but did you design the cover for this, or do you don't do that anymore? You only write?
Well, two questions there. I don't do much graphic design anymore because the writing is pretty intensive, and that takes up a lot of my time, and I'm very successful at that right now. I do miss not doing the graphic design. In terms of whether or not I did the cover, no, I did not do that particular cover, but I do love it because it is very graphic. And it was a design done for me by the publisher so that it's very clearly elements that are related to my book. And when you see those elements, oh, that's a Sandra Kitt book. We recognize that kind of cover.
From your next one,
and the next one, Significant Others, very similar.
Sort of silhouette.
That's
sort of
right, very graphic representation. Publishers traditionally do not like their writers to have any say in deciding the covers. They want to maintain that control. And, we're coming from different places in terms of what the cover should look like. An author is primarily concerned that it be an attractive cover, but also that it's really representative of what they've written. A publisher, on the other hand, is more concerned that it's a cover that's going to sell the book.
Right.
So it may not necessarily represent the story. So we're coming from two different avenues, and it's not an issue that I really fight a lot about because I've been very fortunate. I've been very happy with the covers that have been done for me, and certainly The Color of Love and Significant Others are beautiful covers that I'm very pleased about. Although I did actually, as an artist, I actually did do a cover for one of my books. It's called Love Everlasting, and the publisher of that book was using art school students for the covers, and so the covers weren't really all that great. And I said to her when she took the book on, would she mind if I did my own cover? And she was very sort of hesitant about that. Again, it's the whole thing of letting the writers be involved.
Right.
And I said, look, let me just do a nice little watercolor and send it down to you, and you let me know if you think it's going to work. And I did, and she loved it. And so that's a case, and it does not happen. It's very unusual, where I did the cover of one of my own books. I'm pleased about that.
Yes, indeed. I'm always fascinated by reflections within reflections of text. So you're reading a text, and you're reading a text that has an interesting cover on it, and within it is someone within it who designs covers for these books, and it makes an interesting line of connection.
Well, it sort of makes it a little difficult for me in that I, as an artist, I tend to connect visually to something right away based on composition and colors and all that sort of good stuff. And then I have to kind of shake my head and step back and then just see, well, now does this work for the book? And separate myself out of it.
Maybe backtracking a little bit, I should have asked this before. In terms, you said you were a voracious reader.
Yes.
What kind of, what are your favorite authors? Is there somebody that you think about when you write things, or?
Well, it's sort of unfair, and I don't like to really state that I have a quote-unquote favorite writer, because I tend to read a lot of everything. I don't read just fiction. I don't read just women's fiction. Recently, I've been reading a lot of things in the area of spirituality, a lot of biographies, self-help, cookbooks. I really do like to read everything. I have had some influences on my work, the way people describe things, characterizations, and that can, just go across the border of different kinds of writing, nonfiction as well as fiction. So it's really, really difficult for me to say, this is my favorite writer, or...
Oh, I'm sorry, I was asking for favorites.
Yeah.
But it's a very Derridian, reaching to everything sort of point of view that I think is terrific.
Yeah.
I think that's what holds the world together. If we try and departmentalize everything into little boxes, and it
makes it a little difficult. But
it ruins the view. Yeah.
I think that writers come to being writers because they are readers. And so you do, you know, you read a lot of everything. And I tell writers in courses that I teach that you should be reading everything, and you should be reading a lot, and you should be reading often.
It's very difficult to do in this,
when you're
MTV.
Yes.
I find when I
a lot
teach,
of other influences.
Yeah, you know, like I said, I watch TV too much, and I'm constantly using TV or movies to illustrate a point so that my students, the light goes on.
In that respect, though, if it works in terms of giving something the students can learn from by giving them something they can relate to, that's fine. And that's maybe one of the real benefits of television, is you can use it as a kind of an educational tool. I don't watch a lot of television myself because I don't have time.
We were talking about the color of love and things that are significant for you, and you had touched briefly on the relationship between police or in law enforcement and the black community. Do you care to elaborate a little bit?
Let me say first of all that what I'm interested in my fiction, besides entertaining you, is to try to talk a little bit about the times we're in, about the people and people relationships. My books are all contemporary. I'm really not I like reading historicals, but I'm not really interested in going back and looking at history too much. I mean, I've been there, done that. You know, we've learned what we're going to learn. I'm interested in the times that we're living in because they're changing so quickly. And as we're going into the future, it's very challenging. I'm interested in people. I'm interested in relationships. How do people connect and click? How don't they connect and click? Where are the conflicts? How do people come together and form relationships? Those are the things that really interest me. So to that extent, my books are, number one, contemporary. Number two, they're very character driven. I'm interested in the people. Where do they come from? What's their story? What is it they want? And so I explore a lot of that in the stories. You know, where are their frailties and their shortcomings? And also, I tend to put a lot of social issues in my book. The Color of Love is a very good example in that it's an interracial story. Significant Others is one about racial identity, in which I talk about that what happens when you have the offspring of cross-cultural relationship, and that offspring is now struggling with where they belong. In this particular story, the heroine is a high school counselor who's counseling a 15-year-old youngster who's biracial. And he's being challenged by the black kids in school to prove he's one of them. But he doesn't want to betray his love of either his father or his mother. You know, those are real important issues right now in a country that is as diverse as ours, in a country in which cross-cultural relationships are becoming the norm and becoming accepted as we look at the population. So that's another big one. The story also touches on something that is very much entrenched in the black community history. The heroine is African American. Very clearly she identifies as African American, but she's fair enough to pass for white. Whole nother issue for her in terms of her identity, in terms of her being challenged. Well, what are you? Crazy questions. Those are kinds of things that, as a writer, challenge me.
I'm remembering Puddinghead Wilson by.
Oh yes,
yes, you know.
Exactly.
How do you define yourself? You know,
exactly. Yeah, and who decides that for you? So I tried to find a really nice balance between a story with characters that people have empathy for, that they really want to know all about, as well as these really important issues that they have to deal with and try to grapple with and come to some comfortable level with.
It's interesting, from your description of Significant Others, I feel that Color of Love is the first book and Significant Others is the second book, because we leave at the end of the Color of Love, your two main characters have resolved to be together, but the issue of children has not been resolved.
That's right.
And New York is such a fascinating city. I have to admit, it frightens me terribly. I've only been there a couple times. It's okay.
We're nice people.
It isn't a question of niceness or badness. It's just that there is so much, and it's so tightly packed.
Well, but you know, New York is an interesting kind of microcosm. It's an incredibly diverse city, and it's a city in which we prove that diversity can work. We can identify 92 separate ethnic groups in this city alone. That is enormous. And people are living comfortably, cheek to jowl, day to day, working, going to school, socializing, whatever, without coming to blows. So it can work, it does work.
Most of them.
At least most of them, right. I mean, you know, certainly there are some conflicts here, there, and everywhere. But for the most part, it does work, and it's proof that it can work. And yes, that was clever of you to pick up on the fact that in some ways, Significant Others segues out of issues that first begun in The Color of Love. My current book, Between Friends, then takes that whole issue another step further. Totally different story, totally different characters. The heroine is now the adult byproduct of an interracial relationship. So she is a full adult functioning who then now has issues in terms of the men in her life, in terms of her father and stepmother and stepbrother. The hero also has his issues. He's illegitimate. The heroine has a best friend who is Irish American. You know, it's really sort of mixed up. We talk about multiculturalism, which is a very interesting term, but in the true sense of that word, if you define it, my books are very multicultural. They are about the society that I live in. They're about the world that I live in right now, in which there is that incredible diversity, and you interact with people who are from different backgrounds, you know, and all kinds of things, all kinds of relationships come out of that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes has been the attempt to, you know, let's make it so that we're not making judgment or passing judgment or perceiving it in any unique way at all. You know, the blandness of it is so, yeah, you have to.
You can't be nice about it. I mean, you don't learn anything if you're just nice about it and polite all the time. I think that we change and we grow as people when things are difficult and we're challenged to think about them. These are very, the whole issue of race in America, of course, continues to be very, very explosive. And I think that the only way to deal with it, the only way to get comfortable with it, is to talk about it, is to deal with it, get right in the face of it, and admit your fears, admit your prejudice, and just handle it and go from there. And, you know, there are changes. There will be more changes in the future.
Yeah, indeed. I'm coming out of a background. I've read Toni Morrison.
Yes.
And she comments on that black women writers write about black men, and we touched on this before. The character Slack in The Color of Love simplifies for me the lost black male. Any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, yes. Again, getting back to The Color of Love and a couple of things, I get very ambitious in my book. You know, I just throw in the kitchen sink, everything. There are a number of things I wanted to do in that story. Of course, there was the big issue of the relationship between Leah and Jason, the black cop and the heroine. Leah comes from a very middle-class black family. She's educated, very grounded. She's a professional, very close relationship with her family. Her father was a professional. Her sister's a professional. Then you have Slack, who is a black teenager who's really incorrigible. He's marginal in terms of his place in society. He's deeply, deeply troubled. He's angry, totally dysfunctional family. He's the whole total other end of the spectrum between both Leah and Jason. The commonality between Jason and Leah is they're both very middle class. They both come from essentially the same kind of values. Slack is out of that circle altogether. And just because he's black and just because Leah is black, that's really the only thing that they have in common. Otherwise, there are a lot of things that they cannot relate to because they're coming from totally different backgrounds, totally different orientations. So yes, I talk about the fact that he's a lost black male, and Leah is very sensitive to that. She's very sensitive to the similarities and the differences in their lives. So the book is fairly ambitious in that regard, and you know, what happens to him, and the fact that, again, Jason, who's a white cop, is concerned about trying to save this kid, not lose him, knowing that he's really very smart in some things. And how do you take all of those really positive things in this kid who's really at risk and show him that he's good and he's got options and he can make it? You know,
it's heart-rending and at the same very frightening.
Yeah, it is very complicated. Very complicated.
We're winding down to our last minutes. Is there any last piece of advice or
Well, I'm very happy to be a writer. Let me say that I love what I'm doing. I love the challenge of doing stories that people relate to, and based on the response I get from my readers, I'm very, very happy that I'm doing things that resonate and that they feel are important. Get a lot of letters from people who want me to do a sequel to The Color of Love.
What happened? What happened? Well, you see what you have. They just
Well,
have to...
like, kind of, yeah. I'm not going to do a sequel, but there is a spin-off that I'm working on right now. And I encourage everyone to read. I encourage everyone to write. I think every human being has at least one story in them. And so we all have the capability of telling our story, our side of things. So go for it.
That's a beautiful thought to leave us with. Thank you, Sandra Kitt, for joining us today on Writer to Writer. And thank you very much for being with us today on Writer to Writer.